Welcome to the Workflow Podcast. If you enjoy this show, please like, share, and or subscribe. And now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome back to the Workflow Podcast for our final episode in Season 2 on optimizing your body and mind to perform your best at work. And that's something that I've definitely not been doing over the past couple of days, as I took part in a 48-hour fitness challenge, mental challenge. I don't know what it was, but basically I was working out once every 4 hours for 48 hours to raise funds for myeloma cancer research. And it wasn't as difficult as I anticipated. However, maybe I should rephrase that. It wasn't necessarily that the working out was difficult. I mean, I pushed myself pretty hard, but it was more so the sleep deprivation. And particularly on night one, because I stayed up to watch Macedonia play Ukraine in the European Cup, which meant I didn't do my late workout until 1:30 in the morning. And then I had to wake up again after about 2.5 hours sleep to work out at 5 a.m. So sleep is definitely Mother Nature's ultimate biohack, as I have discussed in a previous episode, and it should not be neglected. But of course, if you want to learn out more about that fundraiser and perhaps contribute to cancer research for myeloma, which is a rare blood cancer that is chronically underfunded, just search for multiple workouts at gofundme.com and you'll find my fundraiser there. I've raised almost $2,000, which is well beyond my initial $1,000 target, but hopefully I raise a little bit more. But with that, let's get into today's episode, which is all about health supplements. You know, I've talked about nutrition, I've talked about sleep, I've talked about movement, sunlight, fasting, all sorts of stuff. And of course, that is the foundation of optimal health, optimal cognitive and physical performance. But of course, there are things you can do to get those 1%ers, you know, the icing on the cake. Or perhaps there are certain parts of your life where perhaps you're not getting enough sunlight for whatever reason, or perhaps you're finding it difficult to eat as well as you could, and you want to supplement to get that those gaps filled, so to speak. So in this episode, we're going to talk about some of my favorite health supplements, but not just health supplements rather, that will optimize your focus, your memory, and your mood. And again, I just want to stress that these are supplements. They are there to supplement a healthy diet, adequate sleep, and sufficient movement and exercise. They are not there as substitutes. They are ultimately supplements. And a quick disclaimer, when it comes to supplementation of any kind, do your own research, because everybody is essentially different. Experiment and see what works for you, because there is no such thing as average. We are all our own unique people with our unique biophysiology. There are numerous factors at play when it comes to how effective a certain supplement will be for you, based on various lifestyle factors, based on various biological markers that you are privy to. And of course, it's always best to speak with a physician or a general practitioner or a doctor before taking any supplements. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get into it. Number one, perhaps the most popular supplement out there would have to be fish oil or krill oil, based on the omega-3 fatty acids that it gives us. Essentially, omega-3 fatty acids are found in fish, and as discussed previously, they've been linked to numerous health benefits, including the maintenance of the healthy functioning of the brain, blood flow in the body, and essentially protecting the brain against damage and aging. Now, there was a study published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health, which suggested that deficiencies in fish consumption or omega-3 fatty acids is linked to an increased risk of depression. So that is obviously going to tie directly into how we perform at work. The better we feel, the more predisposed we are towards emotional well-being day to day, the better we will perform at work. So with all of these supplements, I will have links in the show notes for you so you can find some of the better supplements to essentially purchase and supplement your existing diet. So number one, fish oil and krill oil, if not omega-3 fatty acids. Number two, L-carnitine. So back in my 20s, I used to take L-carnitine to get shredded. So this was back when I was hitting up those EDM music festivals and carrying bottles of water purely because I was thirsty and no nefarious reasons were at play, of course. Same goes for the lollipops and Chupa Chups and whatnot. But nonetheless, it turns out that L-carnitine doesn't just help you get shredded, but it can also benefit the brain. Now, this benefit extends to improving alertness and memory, as well as treating Alzheimer's and depression in the elderly. But when it comes to our work, it can definitely help with alertness and memory. So if we actually just pull up one of these studies, so one of these studies was performed back in 2012, and they essentially found that supplementing with L-carnitine can have a preferential effect on brain tissue. It may be of benefit in treating Alzheimer's, dementia, depression in the elderly, HIV infection, chronic fatigue syndrome, peripheral neuropathies, and a whole bunch of other benefits. So it goes well beyond simply getting ripped to look your best at a music festival. So that's L-carnitine. Number three, creatine. So L-carnitine, I use that to get lean. Creatine, I use that to get big. I mean, anybody who has pushed themselves in the gym, who has gone down the rabbit hole of bodybuilding supplements would have taken creatine at some point. Now, creatine essentially does stuff to the body like will essentially retain more water in your physical body tissue, in your muscle tissue, and essentially that will give you this initial sort of look that you appear to be a little bit more bloated than you normally are, but it does help you push heavier in the gym. So beyond an initial loading period where you're taking multiple teaspoons of creatine every day, you then taper off and take maybe 1 teaspoon a day. Now, I found that I didn't really like the water retention. I found that it made me look fat, so I jumped off it. But like L-carnitine, creatine also has benefits when it comes to the mind. There was one study which actually found that vegetarians who took creatine demonstrated a 25 to 50% improvement on memory and intelligence tests compared to when they didn't supplement. So creatine can actually boost our memory and thinking skills. So in this particular study, performed back in 2003, it was found that 5 grams, so that's 1 teaspoon of creatine, a 5-gram dose once a day for 6 weeks would enhance intelligent test scores and working memory performance in 45 young adult vegetarian subjects in double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover design studies. So they found that it can have a positive effect on both working memory and intelligence, both of which require speed of processing. So these findings they found underline a dynamic and significant role of brain energy capacity in influencing brain performance. So creatine is a brain booster, and it is definitely something worth checking out. Of course, I would skip the loading period, which might be instructed on the consumption instructions on the label, but I would definitely just start by taking maybe 2.5 grams a day, so maybe half a teaspoon, and then working your way up to 5 grams a day, which is 1 teaspoon. Doing that for a couple of weeks, maybe 4 weeks, and then cycling on and off, which is something you might want to do with all supplements. to give your body a break, but also to avoid the effects essentially wearing off because your body essentially normalizes it as well, but also to avoid dependency because some of these supplements are naturally produced by the body in smaller quantities, and you don't want your body to rely on that external supplement and then stop producing it itself. Now, this isn't true of all supplements, it is true of some, but definitely worth cycling on and off most supplements. That cycle will vary depending on the supplement. So simply, if you are looking for, say, L-carnitine or creatine or any of these supplements, just Google L-carnitine optimal cycle, and you'll get a whole bunch of information there on how to cycle these supplements. So that was creatine. Number 4, Ginkgo biloba. Now, Ginkgo biloba is derived from a tree. It is essentially was a Chinese herbal supplement, which increases blood flow to the brain, improves focus, and improves short-term memory. And so, again, we've got a study that was performed back in 2011, which found that in a small cohort of normal elderly individuals, a mild increase in cerebral blood flow is found after consumption of Ginkgo biloba. This was also in the part of the brain that is responsible for reasoning and complex decision making. So this study was performed amongst elderly people, but there is evidence that I've seen in other studies that suggests that the consumption of Ginkgo biloba is also useful when it comes to improving focus and short-term memory and blood flow to the brain of normal 35 to 45-year-old healthy adults as well. So that was number 4, Ginkgo biloba. Number 5, lion's mane. So lion's mane has become incredibly popular over the past, say, 10 years or so with the likes of Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, Dave Asprey, Ben Greenfield, and numerous other biohacking celebrities, if you will, talking it up. And it's also being packaged by the likes of, say, Mushroom Coffee and various other providers out there who sell powdered forms of lion's mane. Now, if you've actually seen the lion's mane mushroom, it kind of looks like a lion's mane. It's quite big and white and fluffy in appearance. It's not cheap. The last time I saw it in South Melbourne Market here in Australia, it was about $80 Australian dollars a kilo, if not more, which is about, say, $60 US per kilo. But of course, you don't need to buy the actual mushroom. You can buy it in powdered form. Now, research on lion's mane has linked it with reducing mild symptoms of anxiety and depression. And it has also been said to boost cognitive functions such as memory, focus, and mood. Having said that, existing studies have only been performed on animals, and sometimes just because it works on or has a particular effect on, say, a mouse or a rodent, doesn't necessarily mean it will always have a similar effect on Homo sapiens. But having said that, I've tested various lion's mane products. For me, I notice a mild improvement in my own cognition. It might be a placebo effect, but there is definitely an improvement when I take lion's mane or even chaga mushroom, which is number 6. The chaga mushroom, kind of like lion's mane, is antioxidant rich and has been shown to improve learning and memory, reduce inflammation in the brain, and lower oxidative stress on our brain. So the power of mushrooms, lion's mane and chaga mushroom. Number 7, D-ribose. Now, D-ribose has long been linked with benefits when it comes to athletic performance, but an emerging body of research is actually linking it with improved mental clarity, energy, and sleep. So if we actually take a look at this study, which was performed back in 2006, we can see that D-ribose significantly reduced clinical symptoms in patients suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome. We also see that supplementing with D-ribose, and it was about 5 grams a day resulted in a significant improvement in all 5 visual analog scale categories. So these are energy, sleep, mental clarity, pain intensity, and well-being, as well as an improvement in patients' global assessment. About 66% of patients experienced significant improvement while on D-Ribose, with an average increase in energy of 45% and an average improvement in overall well-being of 30%. So that's D-Ribose. That's something I've been supplementing with for the past, say, 3 months on the back of advice given to me by biohacker Lucas Owen, whose YouTube channel you should definitely check out. It's called Boost Your Biology. And I find that it definitely gives me a kick in terms of my energy and general sort of alertness, particularly in the afternoon, because I tend to take D-Ribose with my lunch at about 1 p.m. So that was D-Ribose. Number 8, Cistanche herb, or the Cistanche herb, which is primarily found in North Africa and Asia. It's also known as desert ginseng. It has numerous health benefits as well, particularly cognitive benefits when it comes to the enhancement of learning and memory and protecting the brain against the brain, rather. We're not protecting Bain and Capital here, we're protecting the brain against damage and deterioration. So it was a study published in a reputable journal, The Frontiers in Pharmacology, which was essentially a review on the Cistanche herb. And what we see in the actual study here is that there was definitely a learning and memory enhancement demonstrated. And if we look at so we found that the Cistanche herb, not only has it got these cognitive benefits, but it's also used for its antioxidative, laxative, anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, antiviral, and anti-tumor effects in traditional herbal formulations in North Africa and Asian countries. So it does deliver numerous health benefits as well as cognitive benefits when it comes to the improvement of our learning, memory, and again, protecting the brain against deterioration. Number 9, caffeine. Now, I am from Melbourne. I love my coffee. These days, I'm actually scaling back as much as I love it, because I do find if I have too much coffee too soon in very short intervals, I will just get jittery and I will crash. So it's not really good for me in that sense, but I tend to nowadays have one strong latte, perhaps mid-morning at about 11 a.m., and that's pretty much it for the day. If anything, if I am planning to hit the sack a little bit later in the evening, and if I feel like I need a caffeine hit, either because I just want one, because I enjoy coffee, I enjoy going out to a cafe, having a chat with the barista, I enjoy the feeling of a hot cup on my hand, particularly on a cold Melbourne winter's day, I will have one as late as maybe 1 or even 2 p.m., but typically I try not to have coffee after midday, because the half-life of caffeine, as we've previously discussed, is about 7 to 8 hours. I mean, it depends on your personal biophysiology, could be less, could be more, but typically 7 to 8 hours is the average. So I don't want to have a coffee at 4 p.m. because it might keep me up at 10 p.m. when I'm trying to get to sleep and I've still got about half of that coffee in my system. So you really need to look out for these things. But coffee definitely is the wonder drug, if you will, when it comes to making us more alert, improving our reaction times and our general brain functions. Now, as I said, too much caffeine, you're going to get anxiety, jitters, you're going to crash, you're going to find difficulty sleeping. And so this has a negative cumulative effect on mental performance. So like any tool, it's all about how you use it. So my daily caffeine intake is about 180 milligrams of caffeine. Now you want to be conscious of how many milligrams of caffeine are in what you're drinking. And that's not just coffee, it's kombucha, it's tea. You can get caffeine from numerous different beverages. And just to highlight this, if I look at nitro coffee, say from Starbucks, and we want to see how many milligrams Okay, so nitro coffee from Starbucks has 17.5 milligrams per ounce, but Starbucks' cups aren't small, so a 16-ounce cup will effectively have about, say, close to 250 milligrams of caffeine, which is about 4 shots of, say, espresso coffee. And that's just one nitro coffee. I remember having a extra large nitro coffee. This was when I was on my way to the airport. I was in Soho in New York at a WeWork, and they had free nitro coffee on tap, and I'd never tried it before. And I thought, hey, I'm going to try this. So I got a big old cup, poured it to the brim, which is not something I normally do because I typically like my coffees small. Being of European descent, macchiatos and small lattes are definitely my thing. But whatever, I just poured this. It was the only cup there, so I just figured I'd just pour it to the top, and it must have been about 32 ounces, which is like six, maybe eight, eight espresso shots of coffee. And let me tell you, I talked the taxi driver's ear off on the way to JFK Airport that day. So definitely be conscious of how much caffeine is in what you're drinking, because it could be the cause for your jitters, your anxiety, your insomnia, and myriad other things. But if we use it effectively, if we use just enough of it, it can really help us to be alert and physically present in the moment and do some of our best work. Now, there are supplements out there that combine coffee or caffeine with chaga mushroom and lion's mane mushroom. I mean, there's a company called Four Sigmatic, which you can check out, and I'll have a link to the show notes for you, or in the show notes for you, rather. Number 10, BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Now, this is essentially a molecule that's released when we move, when we fast, when we have exposure to sunlight, as we've discussed in previous episodes. But aside from doing those things, BDNF can be found in certain compounds like curcumin, cocoa, cascara, and lutein, which support the mechanisms responsible for the production of BDNF. So that was cascara, curcumin, cocoa, and lutein. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that last one right, lutein. So number 11, MCT oil, or emulsified MCT oil, preferably. Now, in the episode on fasting, I talked about how fasting promotes autophagy when the body starts to use its fat stores for energy, but also the release of ketones in the brain, which is a source of slow release energy. Now, you can pump up your ketone levels by supplementing with MCT oil. Now, it's also, one thing I will say on this is, when our bodies don't have enough carbohydrates, we reach a state called ketosis. Now, this is typically after 16 hours. Now, if you are fasting, it's also worthwhile supplementing with just a tablespoon of, say, MCT oil to get your body some essential oils and acids and whatnot. But I find it's just a great way to increase ketone production, which also supercharges the metabolic effects of a ketogenic diet. So I like to add a tablespoon of MCT oil to my teas, to my black filtered coffees if I'm having a black filtered coffee, sometimes to my latte, but not so much. Don't want to ruin that coffee art on top of the foam by adding oil to my latte, do I? But no, I'm just joking about that. But MCT oil rather, is a great way to enhance ketone production, but you don't necessarily need to be fasting to enjoy the benefits of MCT oil. You can just be on a regular good old diet and will still derive some benefit from that. Number 12, Alpha Brain. Alpha Brain is a supplement that the likes of Joe Rogan swears by, but of course he would because he owns 50% of the company that manufactures it, called Onnit. Nonetheless, I have tried Alpha Brain. It has been subject to double-blind clinical studies, which show that it does improve your ability to remember names and places, focus on complex tasks, think clearly under stress, and improve your reaction time. In fact, Joe Rogan says that he doesn't ever commentate at a UFC match or do stand-up or anything that requires cognition and verbal acuity without taking some alpha brain. He's obviously developed a dependency on it. But the double blind study I speak of was published in the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and it found significant improvement in verbal recall and executive functioning when supplementing with alpha brain in a group of healthy adults aged 18 to 35. So there will be a link to the study in the show notes of this episode, but you can see that the results did indeed find that 90% of participants in this study demonstrated such adherence to these results, which is not a small number. Moving on from that, a couple of other supplements that I just wanted to throw in here was one, probiotics. We've talked about the improvement, or we've talked about the importance of a healthy gut microbiome on the production of, say, serotonin, emotional regulation, mood, as well as keeping you regular and having benefits in terms of other myriad bodily functions. But as we know, the second brain is essentially our gut, and it can determine how we feel, it can determine the decisions we make, it can determine our emotional well-being, our life satisfaction, and so many different things. So probiotic supplement, preferably with, say, 30 to 50 billion bacteria in it, is what I would go with. It's definitely what I take on a daily basis, but again, do your own research before supplementing and speak to a health practitioner. And number 14 would have to be a little-known supplement called BPC 157. Now, not directly related to cognitive performance, but related to healing the body. And of course, if we're sitting at our desks, if we've got aches and pains in our lower backs, if we have neglected the gym or neglected going for a run because our knees and our hips are sore, well, BPC 157 is kind of like a wonder peptide that helps your body heal itself like Wolverine. At least that's the tagline. It's something that many personalities such as Dave Asprey, such as Joe Rogan, such as Ben Greenfield absolutely swear by. And we'll have a link in the show notes for you to check that supplement out. There's only several places where you can get it as far as I am aware. So we'll have a link to one such vendor for you in the show notes. So if you are suffering from, say, meniscus tear in the knee, if your hips are out of sorts, I'm not saying it will heal you with 100% confidence, but I found for me, I definitely had very questionable knees thanks to years of pounding the pavement. And after about 4 weeks of supplementing with BPC 157, I found that my knees just healed up, and like I would do squats and I would not hear any creaks or cracks in my knees, and I could go running again without pain in my knee. And when you have a healthy body, obviously when you're sitting down to your work, you're not feeling those niggling pains and aches and whatnot. Well, it's much easier to focus on the task at hand. And also it just sets us up to live a longer, healthier life, particularly as we age and get into our senior years. One of the biggest causes of early death as an elderly person is taking falls. And the more we can do to make sure that our joint health is the best it can be, and this isn't just down to supplementing, it's also down to stretching and doing mobility exercises and moving and not being sedentary. The more we can do of that, the better chance we give ourselves of not just living a long life, but living a long, healthy life, one where we can be up and about, one where we're not privy to falling over and being subject to an early death as well. So that was number 14, BPC 157. And again, I will have links in the show notes for everything we've discussed today. So with that, I'm going to bring this episode of the Workflow Podcast to a close, and this season of the Workflow Podcast to a close, all about optimizing your mind and body. If you do have any feedback for me about this season, any questions, any comments, I would love to hear from you. You can hit me up anywhere, really, on the Steve Glaveski website, on Twitter, at Steve Glaveski, or on YouTube. Just leave a comment on the YouTube episode. So, as always, if you want to read the article, read any of the studies that this podcast episode came from, you can do so at steveglaveski.com, and you can find show notes to every resource we've discussed today in your podcatcher of choice. So with that, I've rambled on long enough. Go North Macedonia, or go Macedonia, should I say. Go Phoenix Suns. And I will see you all for Season 3 of the Workflow Podcast. Peace out.